Good morning and welcome to another episode number 7 of Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy. Did that wake you up? Well, I have a saying here. You can drink coffee, I guess, but who really needs coffee when you've got Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy? Today, on today's episode 7, we're going to talk about insulation. And insulation is super important. I think it's often overlooked and takes a back seat to a number of other things. I've been to homes doing little quick and dirty energy audits for our member consumers, and I'll get there and they'll tell me, well, I got new windows and they cost me $35,000, and I got this new heat pump, this marvelous system. It's a SEER of 22 and it cost me $25,000. And I'm thinking, wow, that's great. I'm glad you can afford that or had the ability to, finance it in some way, shape, or form. Let's take a look around at some of the other stuff you got here. And then I climb up in the attic and there's next to no insulation. So really, they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot sometimes when they do that. And it's just, they just don't know. So that's why I thought it was a good idea to do this podcast that started out as a radio program 10 years ago. And again, some of the history I did 5 years, and starting in 2015, the radio show took a 5-year hiatus, and I'm back. So yeah, insulation is often overlooked and not appreciated because it's out of sight, out of mind. It's not glamorous, I guess you could say. You could show somebody, hey, check these new windows out. Man, they're awesome. Double hung, triple pane. Look how pretty they are. White vinyl, low E, and they're resistant to the sun. And they're pretty. They really dress up a house. Or you can say, wow, look at this heat pump unit I've got out here. It's, name brand, and it's 22 SEER, and it cost me $25,000, and man, it's going to save me on my electric bill. But again, if we use that example that we had earlier, next to no insulation in the attic, that's not a good thing. But again, out of sight, out of mind, not very glamorous. So the attic is either the hottest place in the summer in your home or the coldest place in the winter in your home. And let's just talk about summer now. We'll talk about this winter. Let's talk about summer. So the heat outside, and we had a fairly mild summer so far. I think we may have eclipsed 100 degrees only one time now, perhaps. I think next week we've got 4 or 5 days forecast at 100 or higher. So get ready, it's coming. And along with that, high bills. Be prepared for those. They go hand in hand. When it gets hot, your electric bill goes up. When it gets cold, your electric bill goes up. So on and so forth. There are a lot of types of insulation. We hear terms like blanket insulation, bats and rolls. We hear loose fill. We hear blown in, which are the same. We hear loose fill fiberglass. We hear cellulose. We hear foam. We hear closed and open cell. Just a number of different types of insulation. We're going to talk about 3 of these today. Bats, loose fill, and foam. With each one of these types of insulation, they are given an R value by the Department of Energy. And an R value, the R stands for resistance. So in insulation, the R value is a measure of how well the material resists heat flow. The higher the R value indicates greater resistance to heat transfer, meaning the insulation is more effective at keeping heat inside during the winter and outside during the summer. And here's something you always need to remember. Heat always wants to go toward cold. Okay? So if we're talking about summer, the heat of the attic, or the heat of the sun beating down on the roof, which then transfers to the attic, which then transfers to the ceiling because it's trying to get to a colder temperature, and hopefully your home is slightly colder than the attic. So it's always going to be searching the cold. So in order to stop it or slow it down, we have to put in a barrier, and that is the insulation. So batting is, there's a couple forms of bat. There's definitely 4-inch, 6-inch, maybe even more, and it rolls out typically, or it comes in sections of, say, 4 feet by the width of your studs. They say they're on 16-inch centers in the attic. So typically, the thicker the batting is, the higher R value that is. And remember, R value is resistance to heat. So on the R value scale, bats come in at 2.9 per inch. 2.9 per inch. So if you were able to, let's just use a simple math problem, put in 10 inches of bat insulation, and I don't know how easy that's going to be, but I'd say it's 3 rolls or 3 pieces, and it equals 10 inches in depth. That's going to be an R29. It's 10 times 2.9. So let's just go over a quick guide for installing insulation. The maximum thermal performance R value of insulation is very dependent on its proper installation. Homeowners can install some of these types of insulation. Others require professional installation. So here's a couple things I want you to keep in mind when hiring a professional certified installer. First of all, you want to obtain written cost estimates, but not just from one, but from several contractors for the R value that you want or you desire. Ask the contractors their experience in installing the product you are considering. The application, again, can significantly impact the installation's performance. Because if you want to do it sloppy or have somebody do it sloppy, you're going to have a sloppy return on your investment. It's not going to work well. You also want to ask the contractors about their air sealing services and cost as well, because it really is a good idea to seal air leaks before installing insulation. So also ask about references. Read Google reviews. Now, if you choose to install the insulation yourself, make sure you follow the manufacturer's instructions and safety precautions carefully and check local building and fire codes. So batting is definitely a do-it-yourself project. I've done it. Now, I did go into a house and I discovered they had done it. It was during another one of those quick and dirty audits, and I found that they had the batting that has facing on it, like a vapor retarder. It was paper. It was like a cardboard paper, brown paper. They had it upside down. So they had the insulation on the ceiling floor in the attic, when they should have had the facing or the vapor retarder, the paper, facing down towards the living space, and then the insulation above that. The orientation helps control moisture and maintain effectiveness of the insulation. Insulation. Installation and insulation are awful close. I'm sure they're coming across as almost the same on the program. Sorry about that. I'll try to articulate a little better. This orientation helps control moisture and maintain the effectiveness of the insulation. Well, what if you put in 2 layers? Where's the paper go? So when you're installing 2 layers of bad insulation in an attic, the paper backing or the facing, vapor retarder, whatever you want to call it, of the first layer should be placed facing down towards the ceiling or the interior of the living space. The second layer should be installed perpendicular, so you've got all of it going one way inside the joist. So they're going that one way, they're forced to go one way. And then on top of that, you want to put the others going perpendicular. So you turn them like 90 degrees one way or the other. Now, the second layer, it is recommended to use unfaced insulation for the second layer. So if you're wondering where that paper barrier goes on the second layer, it doesn't. It shouldn't exist. And then if you have a third, you probably want to go perpendicular again to the second layer, and again, unfaced for that third layer. So that covers batting. So the next one I want to talk about, and this is, again, we're focusing on attic insulation, is loose fill or blown in insulation. Most popular for new construction is loose fill fiber. I see that all the time. And I'll ask the consumer member, I'll say on the phone, they'll call in and say, hey, I want you to check my insulation level and see where I'm at. And they just don't think they have enough. And they're considering adding, because we have a $500 cashback rebate for those that bring their insulation to an R value of 30 or greater. And 30 isn't ideal, but if you don't have any, you can, most people can afford to put an R30 in. So we incentivize at least that. But they'll call and they'll say, hey, I want you to come look at my insulation and see how much I might have to add in order to get the rebate or to make my home perform a little more energy efficient. And so I say, sure, I'll be there. So I go and I peek my head. I go up in the attic, peek my head in there first, go up in the attic. And sometimes, let's back up. Sometimes on the phone, I'll say, well, what kind of insulation do you have? And they'll say, well, I've got batting, or I've got cellulose or rock wool or whatever. And then they'll say, I'm not sure what I've got. And I'll say, what does it look like? And they say, well, it looks like snow. And I said, okay, you've got blown in loose fill fiber. Loose fill fiber. So it's typically white. Sometimes it's pink. But what I see around here mostly is white. So this can be done by a contractor. Again, you want to make sure you get all their references and read their reviews. I go to Google to read my reviews, and that seems to be helpful. But this is a DIY project if you would like it to be. But before we go any further about that, let's talk about another type of blown-in insulation, and that would be cellulose. Cellulose is a little more expensive. It is popular. It can be used in. There's a wet application that can be used on between wall studs. And it's basically like a big spit wad. I mean, it spits it out. It's wet. And keep in mind that cellulose is recycled newspaper, so it's chewed up newspaper. And it sticks on the wall and dries, just like a spit wad would back in the day. And it will it will fill up that cavity and come out a little further than the studs, and then there's a blade you can put between the you're on 16-inch centers again. You can get this longer blade that goes outside both edges, and you slide it right down after it's dry, after it's good and dry, right down the two studs, and it shaves it off nice and neat so that when you apply your drywall, your sheetrock, it's nice and neat and nice and level. But so cellulose, and then in the attic, it's not a wet application. You want to blow it in dry. So what's really cool about cellulose is it's treated with boron, either both in the wet application and the dry application. Boron is a fire retardant and an insecticide, so makes your home almost fireproof and bug proof. And if it's done properly, should be soundproof. Now I say fire retardant or fireproof. Not really. I mean, it is fire retardant, but it's not fireproof. It will get hot enough to burn and eventually burn it. It slows a fire down quite a bit. In the walls, what it is, there's just not enough combustible air for a flame to stay lit. It just smothers itself. But if it's hot enough, it is going to burn. But it could retard or slow the fire. But the insecticide side of boron is pretty cool. It could keep your home bug proof for a long time. And then again, I mentioned that it could be soundproof because cellulose is so dense, it really makes a good insulation. So those two, blown in loose fill fiber and cellulose, are some of the most popular. Cellulose, again, chewed up recycled newspaper, is marketed as, I've seen a couple of them that come to mind, green fiber, and I guess it's green because it's recycled, or clean fiber. And you can get either one of these and the loose fill fiberglass at your local hardware store. If they don't have it on hand, they can probably order it. And I really encourage shopping locally because, these mom and pop operations, and even some of the franchise, or not franchise, but company owned, corporate owned, like the big box home improvement centers, they keep a lot of the money local. They hire a lot of people. I want you to discourage a little bit from ordering and online and having it delivered to your home, because none of that money comes back to the community. I think they're charging state tax now, but there's nobody employed here, and they certainly don't sponsor any little league teams or peewee football or little dribbler teams. All that money is from your local mom and pops, or sometimes the local big box stores do some of that. So keep that in mind when shopping for your insulation, if you're going to do it yourself. So the third one I want to talk about that's really popular, in particular for new construction in the walls, is foam. There's closed and open cell. And I don't really know enough about it on how to determine which one they use. I think they use probably a combination of those. But they have, we'll go over the R values in here just a second, but they've got the highest R value. They're most resistant to heat exchange. So it's considered the best, but it's also the most expensive. So keep that in mind. Again, if you're going to use a contractor, and you will use a contractor in this one, because this one has to have special equipment, and it's chemically based, and you really need to use a respirator and that kind of thing when applying foam. So leave that to the professionals. But again, ask for references, get several quotes. Look up Google reviews, all those things. So foam is good stuff, and I think they might add the boron to that as well. So you'd be looking at the same advantages of the cellulose, fire retardant, also an insecticide, and so bug proof and fireproof to a certain extent. So really good stuff. So our value for these three, or we'll do four, because we're going to separate loose fill fiber and cellulose, even though they're both blown in. Cellulose is denser, so it's going to have a better R value. So bats, and we talked about that earlier, batting 2.9 R value per inch. Again, if you put 10 inches in, you'd have a R29. It's pretty simple math. Loose fill fibers 2.6. It's a little less than bats, and I think it's because you might think you're filling up a cavity, but and there's space between. So there's air pockets between the loose fill, so it's not as dense. So it has a little lower R value, so you need to put a little bit more in. But let's use a 10-inch example again. So it'd be 10 times 2.6, or an R26. Cellulose, again, is a little more dense, a little heavy, and we're talking about loose fill cellulose in the attic. So it carries an R value of 3.6. So for 10 inches of cellulose, it's pretty heavy, 10 inches is, but it gives you an R36, and that is really pretty adequate for this climate in the high plains of eastern New Mexico. Anyway, if you're listening from other parts of the country, I have put a insulation zone chart of the United States and show you. It breaks it down into 7 or 8 zones. I can't remember. I think it's 7. But it will show you how many inches of insulation you need and the R value associated with it. Foam is really off the charts, as far as R value goes. The R value is 6.44 per inch. Now, have I ever seen 10 inches in an attic? No. I've probably seen 7. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to grab my calculator here. And the 7 inches would have been on a 2x6 construction. And it just bubbles over. It kind of looks like Carlsbad Caverns in there. I'm not sure if it's stalactite or stalagmite. I think it's stalagmite. This is what it looks like. Except it's white. Not dirty at all. So 6.44 times 7 is an R45, which is more than adequate for where we live. So that's good. Again, it's expensive. And I think you could do almost the same. I don't know how much gain you've got, between cellulose and foam, but I promise you the price is probably twice to 3 times more expensive. At least the last time I checked it was. So I really kind of want to move on because we're 24 minutes in and I haven't even talked about this day in history. And I've got some really interesting stuff today. So this day in history in 1776, on August 2nd, 1776, members of Congress affixed their signatures to an enlarged copy of the Declaration of Independence. Exactly 1 month before signing of the document, Congress had accepted a resolution put forward by Richard Henry Lee that stated, quote, "Resolve that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved." They didn't mince words, did they? Sorry about that, Karen, if you're listening. This day in history, 1876, born in Illinois, in 1837, James Butler Wild Bill Hickok first gained notoriety as a gunfighter in 1861 when he coolly shot 3 men who were trying to kill him. A highly sensationalized account of the gunfight appeared 6 years later in the popular periodical Harper's New Monthly magazine, and that sparked Hickok's rise to national fame. Other articles and books followed, and though his prowess was often exaggerated, Hickok did earn his reputation with a string of impressive gunfights. So, on this day in 1876, Hickok was playing cards with his back to the saloon door. At 4:15 in the afternoon, a young gunslinger named Jack McCall walked into the saloon, approached Hickok from behind, and shot him dead. Hickok died immediately. McCall tried to shoot others in the crowd, but amazingly, all the remaining cartridges in his pistol were duds. Thankfully, they were. McCall was later tried, convicted, and hanged. So on this day in 1876, Wild Bill Hickok was killed. In 1943, the early hours of August 2nd, a Japanese destroyer rams an American PT boat. PT, if you didn't know it, stands for Patrol Torpedo Boat number 109, PT 109, slicing it in two. The destruction is so massive, other American PT boats in the area assume the crew is dead. Two crew members were in fact killed, but 11 survived, including a young lieutenant named John F. Kennedy. Maybe that name means something to you. After 5 hours of cleaning to debris from the decimated PT boat, the crew made it to a coral island. Kennedy decided to swim out to sea again, hoping to flag down a passing American boat. None came. Kennedy began to swim back to shore, but strong currents and his chronic back condition made his return difficult. Upon finally reaching the island again, he fell ill. After he recovered, the PT-109 crew swam to a larger island, what they believed to be Nauru Island, but was in fact Cross Island. They met up with 2 natives from the island who agreed to take a message south. The message did reach Lieutenant Arthur Evans, who was watching the coast of Gorma Island, located next to the island occupied by the Japanese. Kennedy and his crews paddled to Goma. A PT boat then took them back to Rendova. Kennedy was ultimately awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal of Gallantry in Action. Of course, you know the rest of the story. John Kennedy becomes the 35th President of the United States. I said Robert, that was his brother. And they both had the same fate. They were both assassinated, unfortunately. That was this day, August 2nd, in history. Hope you enjoyed that. I hope you've enjoyed our show. One more thing I want to add is this. There was a section on the program, Ask This Old House, that I saw recently. It was a rerun, but it was very good. It was about insulation, so I thought I'd pass it along. So I put that on our Facebook page, Morning Buzz with Energy Guy, and it's a link to a YouTube video, but it's a pretty good one. So I'd encourage you to watch that. The Ask This Old House is a program by public television that airs locally on KENW. Farmers Electric Cooperative has sponsored Ask This Old House for over 15 years, and we're proud of that. And it airs Saturday at 11:30 a.m. and again at 1 p.m. And those two versions, the 11:30 and 1 o'clock, are both in high def. And there's a 4 o'clock airing as well, 4 o'clock p.m. But that's not in high def. So if you want to see insulation and nails and nail guns and those things in high def, I would suggest you tune in 11:30 or 1. So we're right at 30 minutes into the program. That's our limit. I will tell you that Morning Buzz with the Energy Guy is the only podcast awarded the Energy Star label. Exciting. So, we will see you next time. I hope you've enjoyed episode 7 on insulation.